There's a wonderful quote I like by Mark Twain that says, "The two most important days in your life are the day that you were born and the day that you figure out why." How many of you have a sense of why you were born? Yeah. At least some sense of why you were born? Okay, good. More than about 12 of us. We have a sense of knowing why you're born. There's a wonderful story illustrates this of a man who moved into a new neighborhood, new home, and every day he would go out for a walk. And there was one house in particular that he would stop and pause because there was a small little picket fence in the front of this beautiful house with every sort of flower, and just the blooms were incredible, the fragrance, and he would stop and really take in the beauty of this particular yard. And one day, as he was making his normal routine and he stopped, he noticed a woman down working in the yard, and he said, "Well, hello, good morning." He said, "I every day walk and stop and enjoy this beautiful garden that God is growing." And she smiled and said, "It is beautiful, and you should have seen it when God was the only one tending to it." That's why we're here, that God, however we call this, all that is spirit presence, needs form, needs to be expressed, needs something with a heart and a mind and hands and free will that can use this one power and one presence to create a garden of our life. That's what we're here for. And the scriptures bear this out beautifully. If we want to turn and look at Christian scripture, in 1 Corinthians 3:9, it says, "We are God's co-workers, God's vineyard, God's structure." Down further in verse 16 is a scripture you may have heard before that is ascribed to Jesus when he said, "Do you not know that you yourselves are God's temple, that God's Spirit dwells in you?" Now, that was almost blasphemy in his time, because if you know anything about that culture and that religious history, that there were only certain temples or an Ark of a Covenant or a particular priest who was walking around with over so many tassels on the bottom of their robe that represented every law that they must be keeping at every moment of the day. Only certain places they believed God's Spirit dwelled and could be found. And so when he said, "Do you not know that you yourselves are the temple, that God's Spirit dwells in you?" that was radical. And I still think today, over 2,000 years later, we're still trying to wrap our mind around the fact that we are God, all that is, incarnate. That we are here to bring to life all that God is. And not only to conceptualize it, but to actualize it. Not only to know about it or think about it, but to be about it, to be the embodiment of that potential. The poet David White said it this way. He said, "The visible and invisible are working together in common cause." I like the way Eddie Watkins Jr. said it, and we sing that around here when we say, "I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up." That you, I, we are the place where God shows up. That is what that we're all about. Each and every one of us doing that. And that, so it's to realize that your presence is requested. That to each and every one of you, your presence is requested. This invitation goes out to you as strongly and as clearly and as powerfully to any other person that has ever been created, including those we call the great masters. Your presence is requested. That you are here as that God incarnate, and your presence is requested. But when your presence is requested, you must be willing to respond to that invitation. I really got the impact of what an invitation means several years ago. Back in the 1990s, I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. And at the time, I was asked to do some help with a magazine, Spectator magazine, to help with their sales and marketing, put a sales and marketing program in place for them. So one day I was in Raleigh and I was working with them, and this well-dressed courier walks in and said, "Is Darlene Strickland here?" Someone went and found me, and there I'm facing a courier, and he said, "Will you sign for this? I have a package for you," and it's a beautiful envelope. Well, now everybody's looking at me like I've just been served for court or something, and I didn't know what it was. So I opened this envelope, and it's an invitation from the governor at the time, which was Governor Jim Hunt. Governor Jim Hunt gave me this invitation personally addressed to me that said, "Would you come on such and such date to a governor's luncheon?" And I thought, well, how exciting. Sure, I'll go have lunch with the governor. I got a lot of things I could tell him. So the day rolls around, and I brush up on my etiquette that may be required if you're going to eat with the governor, and drive up and walk in. And as I'm walking in, I realize, okay, so I'm not the only one the governor invited. There's other people walking in. But I look around, and I'm like, oh my God, there's Michael Jordan. There are all these sports stars that you see on television. There are all the people I see on television, the news anchors and stuff. There were prominent politicians and people that are well recognized, and me. And so as I'm there, I'm thinking, why am I here? And as we experienced this luncheon, some representatives were there from the Special Olympics, and that's what it was about. The Special Olympics were coming to North Carolina, and this was the first meeting of a group of people that said, "Will you help plan and promote the Special Olympics coming to North Carolina?" So I said, yes, sign me up. Well, as I was leaving, I still kept thinking, how was I there? Why was I there? The next morning, the same thing. I woke up and that was on my mind. That was such a special experience. Why was I there? And just as I had the question, I clearly heard this response that said, "Because you accepted the invitation." And I really got it, that, I could spend so much time trying to figure it out, but what's the point? I was there because I accepted the invitation. Each of us, on some level, have accepted an invitation to be here in this body right here, right now. And because you are here, there's another level you can consciously accept the invitation to be that presence, that presences the greater presence. Now, any of you that do English stuff, don't tell me about that after service. I know that was not correct. But you get what I'm saying. You get the saying there. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson really was speaking about that when he said, every man, every woman, every child is the inlet. It is in God, it is in all that is that we live and move and have our being. We're animated. Every one of us is the inlet, and may become the outlet of all that is, of all God is. You see, becoming that conscious outlet requires free will and requires choice, because we can go around life and never really wake up to the truth of who we are. But I believe if you're here, there's some sense of you that you have that realization and you want to be about that business. You want to be that outlet for this creative presence. However you think of God, God is truly contained or defined. It's just a word by any of us. But we know there's an animating spirit that enlivens creation, that we are a channel, we are a presence for that. So today what we want to really dig into is how to be present to yourself as that presence. And that requires something called mindfulness. Now, mindfulness in this day and time has become quite a buzzword. Mindfulness is found in everything from, there's mindfulness programs in hospitals and schools and organizations and synagogues, churches, spiritual centers. There's mindfulness groups, mindfulness found all over the place. I Googled mindfulness and to see what may come up, and it said about 32,100,000 there were entries. So there's mindfulness and everything you can think of. 3 that caught my attention were why mindfulness is better than chocolate. Mindfulness on the go, which sounded a little funny. And then mindfulness and Angry Birds. That one I still don't understand the relationship there. Some real curious ones, but mindfulness is a really popular, it's like Zen used to be popular, now it's mindfulness. But even though it's a popular saying, it's an ancient teaching. Mindfulness is a way, it's a practice and a way of being. Just like peace. Peace is a practice and a way of being. So it is with mindfulness. Mindfulness has been around as far as we can trace it back, at least since 1500 BCE in Hinduism in the context of yoga. Mindfulness has been around in Taoism since the 6th century BCE in Qigong. Mindfulness has been around in Buddhism since 535 BCE. It's really the foundation of insight Buddhism is mindfulness. And then it's also found in Christianity, in Islam, in Jewish practices, as well as many other spiritual practices. And as I said today, it's really a household word. We think about mindfulness, but do we really practice mindfulness? If we look at Scripture in the Old Testament, Psalms 4:4, it says, "Stand in awe. Meditate with your own heart and be still." Many of you are familiar with the Psalms 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." And then in the New Testament, Jesus often said, "What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch." And if you go back to the original Aramaic, watch means be mindful. What they are really saying is to be mindful, that mindfulness is a quality of presence that is innate in every human being. It's part of our awareness. John Kabat-Zinn, who's probably the forerunner in bringing mindfulness practices to the Western world, he says mindfulness is the awareness that arises by paying attention in the present moment on purpose. It's paying attention to the fact that you're paying attention. It's knowing where your awareness is. It's minding your mind. How many of you have drifted out of this building since I've been talking? Okay, bring your mind back. See, it's about mindfulness. There's a beautiful symbol. Would you give me the slide? In Chinese, mindfulness is represented, these are actually two symbols. The top one, the one that looks like a hat pointing up, means heart, but not the physical heart, but such as the heart of humanity, the heart of creation. And then the second symbol below means presence. Mindfulness is about having presence of heart, of being present to the heart of creation and being the heart that is present to all creation. It's quite profound. And in the Buddhist practice, mindfulness is called the most direct. It is the direct path that leads to freedom or to liberation. Liberation from being confused and entangled and falsely identified with the undue concerns and cares of this life. But it's freeing oneself to realize that indeed you are spirit and living from that awareness. The Buddha told a story that helped his followers understand why mindfulness was so important. The story is of a little rabbit. You can take the sign down now because everybody's looking at him. There's a story of a little rabbit that was in a field, a freshly plowed field. And this big hawk saw that rabbit alone in the field and swooped down and picked up that little rabbit and started off with it. And the rabbit said, "Wait, I wasn't paying attention. If I was paying attention, you would have never caught me. Put me down and I'll show you." And the hawk laughed and said, "There's no way you can get away from me. I'll show you." So he dropped the little rabbit, and the hawk flew way back up in the sky and then started sailing down. And just as he was about to catch the little rabbit jumped behind a fresh clod of dirt, and the hawk slammed into the dirt clod. That's kind of a violent story the Buddha used to talk about that then the rabbit was free. But then he goes on to say, as he explained what this meant, is to cultivate a practice where you stay in your pasture, meaning stay in your presence of mindfulness, be attentive, pay attention. And if you are, you will not be caught up and carried away with the cares of life. That you will be free instead. I mean, how often, if you think about our attention, we're caught up and carried away most of the time. Most of the time, we're not really fully present to whatever is in front of us. Have you ever been talking to someone and you're pouring out your heart and they're going, You know they're not listening. And so if it's your partner, you take their face and say, please listen. But we do the same thing. We're not fully present in many different ways. That whatever is in front of us, maybe what happened yesterday, whatever we're afraid of, these things have our attention. It's as if these things are unconsciously, it's like our presence and our awareness is being consumed by an unconscious habit of mind or just experience of what's going on. And very often do we stop and do we really take time to learn the practices that will help us extract ourselves so that we're not caught up and carried away. Because the only way to be truly free in life, and when Buddha talked about, he talked about being safe. And what he meant when he talked about being safe from the hawk, he referred to you need to be safe from your intrusive thoughts, from your own distractions, for the things that would lead you astray from the inside of your own being. It's about being safe from your own self. Don't get caught up and carried away, but learn to be present. And the beautiful thing about being present is all that we need is contained in the present moment. If anything is to be found, can it ever be found outside of the present moment? That whatever we need, we will connect with it in the present moment, whenever that present moment is. So the key is to learn to be mindful, learn to be attentive. It's sort of like driving. I remember when I was 15 years old and signed up and took that driver's education class, and you got out and started doing that. And I remember the instructor, before we could even get in the car, he taught us, now, when you start driving, you're going to need to monitor this mirror, and then that one, and then that one. You're going to need to pay attention to what's going on around you. You need to look down here and see how fast you're going. You need to pay attention to, do you have any gas? And I'm thinking, how in the world can I do all that and drive? Did anybody else remember feeling like that? But now, do any of you ever get in the car and say, oh, Lord, I'm never going to be able to look at all those mirrors and keep track of all of that stuff. Today, we just have to talk ourselves out of texting when we drive, which please don't do that. But those things that we thought we couldn't possibly do all of those things, well, that's how mindfulness is. As you cultivate mindfulness, it's like you're carefully navigating through life. You're paying attention to where am I going? We don't let our tank and our awareness run out. We don't crash into something or fail to look and know what's going around us. We're very aware of everything that's going on, but we're fully present and mindful. When the Buddha talked about this, the most ancient text, one of his earliest discourses, is called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness. The Buddha gave 4 areas. Now, sometime later I'll probably do a 4-week series on this because you can go very deep into every one. But I want to give you insight into these 4 things that will help you cultivate a practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness so you can be present. Mindfulness so that rather than getting caught up and carried away, you learn to become curious. You see, you don't have to get caught up and carried away. If you learn to become curious, that begins to give you some space to reconnect with your presence. Because when we are fully present, it's not just our self that's fully present. When we are fully present, we are that conscious, clear channel. We are what the master teachers were talking about when they said, do you not know that you are the instrument, that you are the place where God is? When you're fully present, you become that place where love is, where peace is, where creative ideas are, where whatever it is. How many of you have some sort of perhaps a meditation or mindfulness practice, and you've been able to get into that place of complete presence and really know what it is to feel that sense of that all is well no matter what is going on? And see, the more we take ourselves to that place, the more we can take that place with us wherever we go. That's the goal that we're seeking here. So when the Buddha talked about this and he gave the 4, the first thing is to get curious. These are my words. The Buddha didn't say that, but rather than get caught up and carried away, we'll encourage you to learn to get curious. And then the acronym that came to me this week when I was preparing this is STOP, S-T-O-P. Stop to observe presence. Would you say that with me? Stop to observe presence. If you use that as a fun acronym, get curious and stop. Stop to observe. Reconnect with presence. And where is my presence? What has my attention right now? The first that he talked about was the body, mindfulness of the body. And what is it that pulls us away from the present moment? I want to show you something. Close your eyes for just a moment. And bring your awareness to your hands. Direct your awareness to your hands. Now open your eyes. Where was your awareness before you directed it to your hands? Did any of you notice the subtlety? Did your awareness seem to come from here and go to your hands? Did it seem to come from outside here somewhere and go to your hands? See, it's different for different people. I would encourage you to practice that from time to time. Just stop and say, whether it's your hands, your heart, whatever, stop and pay attention and focus on some part of your body and notice when you have to shift your awareness, where does it come from? Also begin to pay attention to the fact that you can. What is the part of you that directs all other parts of you? What is the part of you that tells your attention where to go? As you connect more with that part, you will become more available to hear this divine guidance, this divine presence. So the first goal is to embody yourself. Someone was telling me that they were recently talking to a person, and the person said, wait a minute, are you talking to me? I am not in here. Can anybody relate? That you're just what we call absent-minded, that we're not even in our body. How many of you are aware that a lot of times your energy is not in your body? Yeah. And to learn so being able to realize and to learn you have to bring your energy in your body. You have to fully inhabit. You see, unfortunately, organized religion was afraid. There were certain people, I don't want to get all into this, but there were certain people in religious teachings that wanted to hold the power. And so they didn't want the people to know that they had access to the same power. And so they taught people that their bodies were dirty. They taught people that sex was dirty and not sacred. They taught people that things like this that would distance them from what? Their body. That would cut most people right in half, and they're not embodied. We are the people that are healing part of that. There's nothing more sacred than the body. You are the place where God is. The things that we do with the body can be holy or can create havoc. It's up to us through free will. But to invite yourself back into your body, love your body, and notice, how often am I out somewhere else, running ahead or back in the past? I used to, in my car, as soon as I left the grocery store, I was driving home, I was thinking about the order I was going to unpack my groceries. Now, that's how far ahead I used to run. And it takes me, it's still a practice to just calm down and keep myself in my body. So, mindfulness of the body. The greatest tool for this is the breath. To begin to just notice your breath as if you would notice a wave. When you watch the ocean, you're not trying to make the waves be big or small, so don't try to change your breath. Just notice, oh, that's a deep breath. That's a shallow breath. Just as you would notice that's a big wave, that's a short wave. Little by little, pay attention to the quality of your breath. I'm not trying to change it, just notice. That brings you back into your body. The second step then is your feelings and your emotions. You'll notice that we start with the most dense and we become more and more subtle. Subtle does not mean insignificant. Subtle means that it has the profound ability to make giant changes. So you start with the body, and then just as if we're driving a car, we're learning to pay attention at all times to different things going on. Now I start to pay attention to my feelings and my emotion. You see, every experience that you have has a feeling tone. And so to begin to pay attention to whatever is going on, how am I being impacted right now? How is this impacting me? And the most basic way the Buddha taught is just simply notice, does this feel pleasant or unpleasant? Or is it perhaps neutral? But it can start as general as that, to tune in to say, what is my feeling tone right now? Is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? And to pay attention, to tune into your body. So the body, the feelings, the emotions, and then the mind, the mood, the mental, the mindset. You see, in 2 Corinthians 10:5, it says, take captive every thought. It talks about noticing them. So often, we have a thought, but instead of just having a thought, we let the thought have us. Instead of having an emotion, we let the emotion have us. This is about learn to differentiate that I am this presence that is part of all that is. I have emotions, just like currents in a stream. I have emotions and I have thoughts. But if I can learn to distance myself and stand on the bank, I don't have to get swept up and carried away. I can let them guide me. I can let them tell me something about myself. You see, the goal of all of this is to learn more about ourselves. So in mental states, there's a saying, just call a spade a spade. Just call a thought a thought. So for example, if I am thinking, if I'm thinking, gosh, I just am not doing this right. I'm never going to catch on. I don't have what it takes. I begin to say, I'm having a thought that I'm never going to catch on. I don't have what it takes. If I'm walking down the street and I pass someone and they don't look at me and I think, wow, she sure is stuck up. I think, oh, I'm having the thought that she is stuck up. Can you see how that can begin to distance you? That I am not my thoughts, but I am having this thought. And as you begin to pay attention to that mood and mental state, you begin to notice, am I in a mindset of generosity or greed? I am in a mindset of feeling loving and compassionate, or am I feeling fearful and defensive? Am I in a mindset that feels open and expansive, or right now do I feel constricted and shut down? Now, it's really important to say that all of this takes place without judgment. It's not about shoulding yourself, judging yourself. From this place, the power is found in observation and keeping your presence in the body, noticing your feelings and emotions. And then the final one, Richard, would you prepare and give me that song? The final one, so the Buddha said it's foundation of body through breath, foundation of your feelings and emotions, foundations of mind and mental thoughts, and then foundation of the dharmas, which are truth, which is the foundation, being fully present to ultimate reality. You see, this is where we begin to realize that there are many facts in life, but we don't have to confuse the facts with the truth. That there's an ultimate truth that no matter what is going on, a person's bank account may look terrible. That's a fact, and you need to know how to respond to that fact. But rather than totally getting caught up and carried away, get curious about it. Stop to observe in presence. And then you begin to connect with a higher, with ultimate truth that says, God is my source. In God I live and move and have my being, that divine intelligence is informing my mind. And whatever it is I need to move forward in this situation, I now call it forth. I now make myself available for it. You see, that's holding the truth and the facts. That rather than stopping at the facts, you begin to be a carrier and a presencer of the truth. That's what the master teacher Jesus was talking about when he said, you're in the world, but you're not of the world. Be mindful and pay attention to what's going on. Where am I getting caught up? What has my attention? What has my presence? I pay attention to these things, but I'm not those things. And those things cannot consume me. Even if they take my life, they didn't give me my life. That the one power and the one presence enlivens me to be able to sort out what is true from what is fact. And as we do that, we become a walking embodiment. Now we are the presence. This is how we move from conceptualizing the fact that we are the temple of God to realizing it. That we are the walking embodiment. I'm in my own body, my own power, my own energy. I'm attuned to what I'm thinking and feeling, and at all times I'm remembering I am none of those things. I pay attention. I learn what they're trying to teach me. They're there to make a point. You see, a lot of times when I talk with adults will say, well, you know, this thing's bothering me, but it's been bothering me since I was a kid, or it makes no sense. So-and-so, this feeling I'm having makes no sense. And they try to jump right over it. I say it doesn't need to make sense. Curiosity, being jealous may not make sense. Feeling undue anger may not make sense. Feeling whatever you feel may not make sense, but it is there to make a point. And so as you begin to distance yourself, you can realize, what is the point this is trying to make? And let that lead me to a greater realization of truth. That's what it is to live the dharmas, the ultimate truth. As a final story I'd like to share with you about Buckminster Fuller. If you know anything about Bucky or Buckminster Fuller, he was born in 1895 and lived until 1983. He lived to be almost 90 years old, which was older than most of his contemporaries. He's known as one of the foremost visionaries and thinkers. He wrote many, many books. He was an architect, designer, just so many things that even to this day has made our world a better place. Well, before he was recognized as a genius, and he's thought to be one of the most genius people in our history, but before he was recognized as a genius, when he was 32 years old, he was on the brink of suicide. And he was at that place of right now ready to end his life. And just as he was ready to take his own life, something spoke to him, and he said that it came from a place that he didn't really recognize because it was so much bigger than him. And this idea, this thought that reached him in that moment of almost killing himself said, what would it be like if you lived the rest of your life as if you had killed yourself? What if you just let go of worrying about how to do it right or wrong? What if you no longer cared about what other people thought? What if you no longer cared about how you measured up or didn't measure up? What if you no longer cared about whether or not you were a success or failure? But what if instead you became an instrument of the universe? And he said as that question just that reached him about what if you decided, instead of killing himself, he decided to live from the moment as if he had died that night. He said, I decided to become an employee, an instrument of the universe, rather than being a slave to my own thoughts. He said, I no longer took life personal, but I realized that I was there on purpose, for a higher purpose. Later in his life, when someone asked him, they said, how do you understand God or all that is? He said, well, to me, God is simply a verb. It's about an action that expresses through us. I encourage us this week to get curious, to begin to pay attention to what has your presence? What has your attention? When you're lost in thought, where are you? What is it that is consuming you? What are those unconscious thoughts and patterns that are really hijacking your presence? And what would it be like if you could get curious about it and call back your presence, and then invite your presence to presence the greater, all that is? And so I invite you to close your eyes. Presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. There's a holy hush around us. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence